Welcome back. It's common practice for news organizations to parachute correspondents around the world to report from global hotspots. We see them on our screens, we read their bylines, but what we don't often hear about is the number of local journalists who are forced to escape from those very places. The media freedom group Reporters Without Borders says that journalists are fleeing countries like Mexico, Sri Lanka and Myanmar at an average rate of 6 per month. Increasing intolerance of their work either puts these reporters out of work or it puts their lives in danger. However, a handful of exiled journalists do manage to get back to the profession from outside their home country. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on journalists living in exile, still reporting on their homelands from distant lands.
Aid groups say they are extremely worried about what they're calling the nightmare situation of civilians trapped in the fierce fighting in northern Sri Lanka.
Daring to question the Sri Lankan government or the military can be deadly.
I honestly didn't want to leave. Despite all the threats, I wanted to stay there. I thought I could escape to the hills and right from there. But this government was getting a bit heavy-handed with journalists.
Sri Lankan journalist Pearl Devanayagan escaped to Britain in 2001. Her coverage of the civil war in North Sri Lanka had put her on the radar of a government that was growing increasingly intolerant of inconvenient reportage.
For anyone who disagrees with official opinion, these are dangerous times.
A year after Pearl's escape, Lance Guma, a Zimbabwean journalist, had to leave his country for much the same reasons.
The reasons that motivated my leaving were mainly centered around my safety and, of course, just the general environment for journalists at the time. It was not really safe for me to continue being there, and basically I made the decision to leave.
For news media, crossing swords with the authorities is an occupational hazard.
Israel has kept Gaza completely closed to journalists.
The Islamic Republic keeps such a tight grip on any kind of dissent.
When we spoke to Abel Ugba, chairman of the UK-based Exile Journalists Network, he said that the pattern of media intolerance is changing.
In the past, you could almost predict that people running from their country because of their profession were from a military dictatorship. But these days, you find journalists escaping countries which for many years have civilian democratic government. And yet, the climate to press freedom, it's hostile, and many of them are finding it impossible to practice their profession the way they would want to do it.
The military government of Myanmar is notorious for its harsh line against independent journalists, and a group of activists escaped to Norway in the late 80s and began broadcasting back into their country in 1992 as the democratic voice of Burma.
It is impossible to broadcast from inside Burma, so we are outside of the country, broadcasting both shortwave radio and then satellite television that can reach millions of people in the country. More people need more independent and biased news to make decisions for their own life or to participate in politics in a meaningful way. Now government is controlling politics by controlling the media. If they lose control over the media, they lose their power.
And it would seem that DVB's strategy has worked. Its satellite TV broadcasts were crucial during the 2007 uprisings in Myanmar. The footage they put out informed the world and those back at home. But getting the pictures out of a country where journalists are prime targets for the authorities was not easy.
We have about 35 journalists inside Burma filming for us, sending reports for us on a daily basis. But of course, they all are underground. They can never be identified as a journalist working for us.
In SW Radio, the Zimbabwean broadcaster based outside London,
Newsreel by Zimbabweans for Zimbabweans.
There's similar concern for those working on the ground back at home.
Well, they face enormous pressure. Even when you have the current coalition government, our correspondents do not use their real names. We use pseudonyms throughout. We've been doing that for over 6 years.
The risk is heightened because of the impact exile media outlets like DVB and SW Radio have on events back at home. In 2008, Zimbabwe held presidential elections, and media inside the country were hamstrung in what they could report. Broadcasting from thousands of miles away, SW Radio had no reason to fear the Zimbabwean authorities, and their coverage of the election campaign might have been a factor in the institution of the new coalition government.
We mainly broadcasted to people in the rural areas, and even in our content, we always try and make them as simple as possible for the ordinary person to understand. And they were able to use this to make their choices at the parliamentary and presidential elections last year. And I think this is why we were particularly a nuisance and ended up being targeted by the government.
Lance Guma's work with SW Radio Africa is not just a means of livelihood. Here in the UK, he's thousands of miles away from home, and his work helps give him a sense of purpose. But his is a rare case. For most journalists in exile, leaving their country also means leaving their profession.
I think the sad reality is that many qualified, highly qualified, intelligent journalists find that they cannot go back to their profession. They cannot restart their profession. Take the case of her. She's been here for quite a number of years. She's very articulate, she is very active, and she was a very senior journalist before she left Sri Lanka. But here, she's not been able to make her way back into the profession. And her story is not an isolated one.
Living outside Sri Lanka has pushed her into a professional dead end. And given the controversial reports she produced as a journalist there, there's little hope she can go back.
This is a really bizarre government. There's no rationale behind its actions. They virtually said, don't criticize the government's efforts.
So you wouldn't go back?
I can't. I don't think I can pass the airport.
My heart says yes. I miss my family, I miss my friends, I miss everything about home. But unfortunately, my brain has to engage and intervene, and facts on the ground do not suggest that the current dispensation is willing to embrace media freedom.
We are working for the day we can go back with dignity, meaning there is space for democracy, there is space for free media, so that we can go back. We are really working hard for that day.
More Global Village Voices now on journalists in exile.
The democratic voice of Burma and shortwave radio Africa deserve high credit for influences in Burma and Zimbabwe, all while reporting from thousands of miles away. Though the ultimate goal of democracy has not yet been achieved in either Burma or Zimbabwe, the perseverance of exiled journalists has proven to be very persuasive.
Being in close proximity to Zimbabwe, it has been quite shocking and instructive in many ways and levels to watch how Mugabe and his thugs have systematically dismantled opposition journalism in Zimbabwe simply by killing off the journalists or by just bombing and trashing the media houses. In a sense, the Zimbabwean journalists are actually quite lucky because they have fled to South Africa and to the UK, where because of historical and cultural reasons they do have access to the BBC or they're able to write in The Guardian. I don't think a Somalian journalist working as a taxi driver in New York has the same kind of opportunities.
Finally, China, with its huge reserves of foreign currency, is in a position that few economists would have predicted just a few years ago. The country has become an important source of money for economies like the U.S., which have had to bail out banks, insurance companies, and automakers with trillions of dollars, and much of that money has come from China. China is not doing this out of the goodness of its heart. It needs to keep Western economies healthy so that Western consumers can continue to buy Chinese exports. It's a serious and complicated business. However, the people behind the online American comedy network saw the lighter side of the story when they put together our web video of the week. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.
Do your country have bad credit? No credit? It's no problem! Come down to Chinese AAA credit, and we give you all the cash you need. You can use our money for anything. Bail out Wall Street? No problem. Take over auto industry? No problem. Free healthcare for everyone? No problem. But don't take our word for it. Listen to Barack from Washington.
I went to Chinese AAA credit, and they gave me the money I needed to keep this country afloat.
If recession has your country down, Chinese AAA credit will pick you up.
Thanks, Chinese AAA credit.
No problem.